I'm excited to have Rooney Coffman here today, and we're going to be talking about not only the new book, but also a little bit of the history. Rooney, is there anyone else at the school that's been there as long as you have?
I think I'm the senior citizen now.
I thought we'd start with just going over a little bit more detail on the creation of this book. The whole idea was as an alumni project that would have continuity through the most number of students in the past. And that's when you popped in my head, wait, Rooney's been here forever. He's been taking pictures. Let's see if we could do a picture book. And I really wanted it to be, the decision was the environment, because that's what's been there the longest. You know, different students come and go, but the environment relatively has stayed the same. I want to know a little bit of how did you, when I gave you the only instructions was a visual poem of the book, how did you decide the layout?
I'm not sure. I think, the answer to layout is more so intuitive type thing rather than an official decision on it's going to be this way. I wanted some of the history in it, so that obviously comes first, the background for the school. And another area I wanted to include was what I term in this book the icons, some of the memorable faculty of years past. And then we finished with a couple of things of my own. I think one of your problems in something like this is, well, to me, I was wondering, what is your expectations for the book? And maybe that was not a valid concern, but that was one of our initial extensive discussions of what should be in the book, what shouldn't be in the book. And one of the things you're going to realize very quickly, one of the decisions was that people are not in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And that does have an impact on what's depicted because we're not showing lots of people. We do use a few people, usually in a manner in which they're not recognizable. Now, the answer is if you knew that student, yes, you can probably recognize who it is, but short of that, you're not going to be able to identify the person in the picture. And that concern was essentially liability, since we don't have individual photo rights or releases on each one of these images. So that was the choice of focusing away from people. And Martin is right. The campus stays the same much more than people stay the same. But there are things that have major impacts on the school. And normally, when you're photographing people, and you remember, most of my work was done photographing people for communications. They want faces, they don't want backs of heads and so forth. They want to see people doing things. And that's also an impact on what's in the files on pictures of the campus. Again, for publications, you don't want an empty campus. You want to be showing people on the campus. So again, we're putting people in the picture. Now we're turning around and looking at for photographs where people are not present in the picture. We're now in a color world, so the emphasis was moved towards selecting color photographs for use. We joined the digital age in the early 2000s, so digital files were used for those pictures. But prior to that, the only use of color was for major admissions brochures or special publications. So admission or photo files in color prior to 2000 are very limited to go through. And in those cases, we found transparencies that we used and we digitally copied those to put them into the book was the way we got them there.
That's exciting because that really showed another level of difficulty in going through all this stuff to be able to produce the book. How many photos do you think you came up with? You went through thousands of photos to get this stuff.
Uh, Probably there's 250 in there would be my guess.
Right.
Maybe a little less than that. If we have multiple photos on a page, there's usually 3 pages or 3 photos, and then there's a lot of single page photos, 1 to the page. So, yeah, 200 to 250, I would guess, without counting them.
And the choice of layout on it, how did you choose it? Did you just use, as your own kind of gut sense, or because there's a, like, obviously bagpipe together with a bagpipe and a tree. I'm just saying, a bunch of, here's this delightful hats from graduation we have in there. There was a lot of thought that went into the layout of the selection of the photos with each other. And then, of course, where there are these beautiful, more dramatic photos, you let it take up a whole page. So,
Yes. I'm not sure there's any secrets to layout. Well, most of you may have had some exposure to the world of yearbook. One of the first things you learn in yearbook type publications is you don't put equal number of photos on a page. It gives you a sense of balance. You don't want the balance. You try to get odd numbers of pictures, both to the individual page and I would say to the spreads. Most of the time, you're going to want to mix it up that way. The pictures chosen on an individual page usually are a logical grouping of the photographs in it. Sometimes quality of the original photograph is important in determining what size is placed on the page. And again, the cropping on the photographs. When you shoot a photograph, most of them will lend themselves to a certain cropping proportion, even though you shot it one way or the other. You try to normally clip off the things that are not interested and concentrate on what is the important item in the photograph. So some of the pictures are squares, some of them are 5x7s, an old traditional format, 4x5, 2x3. We've got a few that follow, I think, a 6x17 format, very wide and thin. And those would have lend themselves to go across multiple pages. Since we were working on a limited budget for printing, we decided the best thing to do was not to go across multiple pages because you have problems in binding of getting the photographs to line up
right.
to be smooth. So we stayed away from any spread going across multiple pages and confined ourselves to single page setups.
I think you did a great job in getting the essence of the wall without by keeping it family friendly. Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah, we got lucky too. That opening one here, the wall.
Yeah.
That one was a luck to find that one in the file for you.
Well, and what's exciting is that was my era. So I was pretty honored to have that. And the other thing was balancing the right and left side. You put a lot of work in. Does the image complement when you open up the whole page?
Yeah, I built the design thinking very much about the spread, what was on the right and the left hand page when the book was laying open. So that definitely is in there. And that was one of the first draft copies we had. Didn't quite understand how the company was going to bind the book. And when it came back in our draft copy, all the spreads were wrong because we had made the wrong assumption on where page one was going to be. So we got that one fixed and got back on track. But it's why you run drafts of things to find out whether
Yeah.
you're on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you put a nice text with each one. So there's a little bit of text describing them.
Text was limited in it, and there
Yeah.
are some that are
Yeah,
not,
but at least gives
has
a
no
few words,
text with it.
that are with it.
Well, most of the photographs are general enough that you can put yourself in them.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm thinking about is the photographs hopefully will bring back many pleasant memories of your time on the St. Andrews campus. And you can see yourself having done what the people in the photograph is doing.
Yeah, incredible amount of time and work put into getting each one of these, selecting the photos. You talked about how many are potentially in the book, but how many photos did we draw on to get it down to this level? Because you did all the heavy lifting in going through your photos.
Well, the overall photo file probably at this point has, including the black and white negatives, I would say probably 350,000 pictures
Yeah. Yeah.
in
So,
there.
and when I did it, I said, Rooney, I don't care what it takes. We're going to make sure I do it because I knew the amount of work. Fall pictures in here, they're beautiful as well.
Well, it's been 2.5 years in progress, I think, roughly.
Yeah, we've had several different people working on the design. We had a student that helped out but had to move on, and we had our former alumni president worked on some, and it was finalized in InDesign. Is that correct?
InDesign was what was used for the layout.
We started with the possibility of Photoshop just because that's what he was familiar with, and InDesign's clearly the best final decision.
We also considered using some of the stock layouts from the publishing companies too.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was the other thing, is deciding which publishing company. And we looked at several. We looked at the possibility of them being printed, but then they'd have to be shipped by somebody. If you got them printed, print on demand, which one we use. We chose Lulu because my best friend Rick Rossi, who I went to school with, has done publishing. He now helps people with it. And he said, for the price and convenience, Lulu often will generate the most consistent quality pictures that you have. And what we wanted is, once it was done, people could order it and it be handled, and we wouldn't have a delay in shipping or some complication that would occur along with that.
Well, the other thing to consider in this thing, part of the function of this book is a fundraiser.
Yeah.
As a fundraiser, you don't want to be out printing 2,000 copies and find out you sold 1,000, and now you got 1,000 sitting on the shelf. There's where most of your funds are at, waiting to be sold.
Yeah.
So print on demand lets us match the sales to
the volume.
Yep.
Yep. And we've already brought in $1,000 that's going to it. And we discussed in the beginning, I said, Rooney, I want to make sure you're in some way compensated with this. We want it mostly, we wanted to go through the alumni council, and we discussed that in the council. And we want the rest of the money to go to the biggest cause at the time. And I don't think the capital campaign had started when we first did it, had it?
No, the capital campaign wasn't even on paper when we started out 2.5 years ago.
And that's where we came up with the offer, Rooney, was you would get a personal cut, and you chose to donate your cut to one of the programs at St. Andrews. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, my share of the book is going to go to the Coffman Endowment, or the Rooney Coffman Science Sustaining Fund. Our answered school, we always have different names for everything.
Right.
So we're going to put my money into that one to support it. So everything raised by the book will go back to the school in some manner. The sustaining fund was started, Tom Blackburn was behind it, I think, initially, along with a few of the other alumni. He was brought in as a consultant, 15 years ago, 20 years? Well, probably 15. John Niesel was chair, I think, at the time. He came in to do some consulting work on the science program. And Tom elected, in lieu of taking his fee that was being paid to him, he put it into the seed money for starting the Coffman Fund. I assume the alumni involved picked my name to hang on the fund. I was not involved in the initial naming of it. But yes, I am very proud to have an endowed fund named after me.
Yeah, well earned. So that fund is being used to help students generally around the science program and so forth, right?
It's being used in the science program to support student research, their attendance to meetings. We're now using some of the funds to bring in some people to speak to the students. Jackie Stevens is going to be here in the spring. She was a distinguished alumni winner this past year, to spend a day and a half with the students, talking to them and looking over campus, bringing back some memories. Jackie is at LSU.
The rest of the money is going to the capital campaign. That one of the biggest projects is Belks, which you have some pictures of how he was affected in the flood in here too.
Not so sure about that.
I think, there's one.
I've got a number of pictures showing the science building affected.
Oh, that's it. The science building.
Flood,
that's right.
no, you're right.
You're right. my correction. It's representative of the flood because it was such a big deal.
Well, basically, you're looking at about 30 inches of water in Belk and the Liberal Arts Building and Morgan Jones. One way to think about it, if you were sitting at the desk in your office, what you had on the desktop was dry, but if you pulled out the center drawer in your desk, it was wet.
Yeah.
That was where the water line was in the building.
And that really wiped out so much, especially the Belk Center. But you do have a nice representation because it's such a cornerstone event of that time, too.
There's no question that it was a major event of that time.
Your experience in photography, how'd you get into it? Because you were not hired as the photographer. This is an extra thing that somehow you started, you got into, and talk about that. Well, and also just start with what you officially were hired as back in what, the 70s?
Well, actually, it was back in the 60s.
Okay.
Remember, I graduated in 1968. In the spring of 68, it was a question of what was I going to do. I had elected to participate in the teacher education program and went through it to get the teaching certificate. And at that point, I had a job offer to teach in Moore County. And about the time I was thinking about that, Bob Pettigo came down the hall and said, we need somebody to be the director of logistics for the new science building that we were constructing at that time. And that one seemed to be a whole lot more interesting than Moore County. And you might not believe it, but at that time, it actually paid better than the teaching job as a starting position. So that set me off as the director of logistics at St. Andrews. And the old science facilities had, as part of it, 2 dark rooms. And the old science facility, if you don't know, is the end of the liberal arts building next to the parking lot. We had, 2 biology labs and a general science and physics lab and 3 chemistry labs in that end of the building. And as part of those, there were 2 dark rooms. The dark room, one of them was being used by the students for yearbook work and so forth. And I had always had some interest in photography, but had never got serious about it. So at that point, I decided that I was going to pursue it and learn how to develop film in a dark room. And a couple of students showed me how to load the film into tanks and develop it. And off we went in doing it. Bought a Pentax Spotmatic as my first single lens reflex. And that may have been a first class mistake. The number of cameras I've bought since then and the amount of money I've plunged into photography makes that camera look incredibly cheap. But that was the start, and we did work for the science program. After a while, we were shooting plays for drama. And in 1985, I was approached. We need photos for publicity. How would you like to have the title of director of photography and shoot photographs for publications for us on the side and news releases? So that was how we got into it, and been chasing after to some extent ever since then.
When did you move to Canon? Because that's what you've been on as long as I remember.
Well, I started with Pentax and stuck with Pentax through, I would guess, the mid 80s. But we were seeing with the 90s coming the autofocus cameras. Well, it turns out Pentax developed one of the first autofocus lenses. They did not follow up on it and expand their collection of autofocus lenses. Canon came out pushing the autofocus lenses. That was the change to Canon to get the autofocus capabilities in the lenses. And later it kept me with Canon because they had the low price digital cameras coming out. Canon was out there with their digital cameras probably 6 years before Pentax came up with their first digital camera. So that led me down the Canon path. And once I got into it, it gets incredibly expensive to get out of it. So I've stuck with it. The digital age, you don't have to buy film, but you really get hit when it comes time to buy that digital camera.
Mhm.
Now you're looking at, well, the first digital camera we had at school was a Canon 30D. At the time it came out, it was a $3,000 camera. At the time the school bought it, they were on the verge of coming out with a new model, so they had reduced the price down to $2,000. Now, currently, Canon's, I want to say 6D Mark II. I think I got the wrong model number on it.
That's right.
Out there is a $2,600 camera. So, in theory, you can argue the price of the cameras haven't changed much. The big difference you find is you can also buy a mirrorless Canon camera for $500 versus closer to the top of the line. And if you want top of the line, you're paying, I think, what, $5,000 right now for the R5 Mark II? No, yeah, R5 Mark II is going to be $4,300, I think. But once you buy the camera, you can shoot to no end because you're not paying for the film cost. But what you find out, if you're not one of these that edits carefully, you're paying for the storage cost and the computer power needed to move those digital images. When we started in digital photography, we were looking at what, 3 megabytes. Now we're up looking at 45 to 60 for the high resolution images. So it takes much more space to store those images, and something like that R5, you can knock off 30 of those images in 1 second. So you have huge files you're getting. Now, the great thing about that huge file is you can crop in little sections in there and get a full size picture out of it. So that's a wonder you couldn't do in those little files you had of the days old. You needed every pixel you could get if you want to make a large image out of it.
What are some things you've learned over the years about photography? Because it sounds like you learned photography at St. Andrews through the darkroom and taking pictures.
Yes, I guess I did. I am an avid reader, and those days we read all the photography books from A to Z. And if you step in my office now, you're going to find there's a huge collection of photography books surrounding it now. I will quickly concede at this point there's a huge number of those books that I haven't read that I've picked up here and there in thrift stores at very low prices. That I'm going to read them one day.
Right.
They're there for the future. But the one thing you find in photography, whether you're shooting digital, black and white, the basics continue on. They don't change. And the number one thing, if you want to master the world of photography, you need to learn the relationship between ISO, the sensitivity of the sensor to light or film to light, the shutter speed, and the aperture. Everything you do in photography is a trade off in those three settings for what you want to get. Aperture is going to control depth of field, shutter speed controls the ability to stop things. And as you make a trade for those things, you then have to adjust the ISO to let you successfully make that trade. So once you master those three pieces, then you can work out your exposures. The other side of the bed in photography is in reality, light is everything. Having that camera when you get the magic moment in lighting is incredibly important. You can go days when you don't get what you want. And you can also hit that day that there's the image, but the camera's back in the office. I'm going to miss it. So, but you get lucky some days and you get what you want. And a number of these pictures in the book are that type of thing that we got lucky that day. The lighting was right to give the spectacular color. Obviously, some of it gets to be, well, with the digital world, there's some manipulation in it. At times, you're going to find we're in an age where people tend to like saturated colors much more than reality. Well, nobody wants reality; they want better than reality is the bit. So there is some enhancement of colors, and you pull up one of the imaging programs, you're going to find you got sliders there for intensifying the vibrance in the picture, the color saturation, to push them up. Obviously, the old bit of contrast slider there, and a half a dozen others. And the AI now used to be, if you had a photograph of it, it was real. With the AI world, particularly now, sometimes that's not anywhere close to being true.
Right.
The AI manufactured the picture for you.
You're kind of the living historian of St. Andrews right now. Some stories of how it's evolved and changed. The campus has luckily stayed pretty much the same. There are things we want to improve, but any monumental things that you remember that stood out over the many years of involvement with St. Andrews?
Well, I think there have been a number of changes over the years. Oftentimes they change because of endeavors on campus. Most of the gang, unless you're back in my ear, will not remember the fact that what is the football field was a cotton field once upon a time. When I set foot on it, there was cotton growing out there where the football field is. One of the one of their big change periods was roughly 1975 when Von Perkins became president. We got into the land development, which started with the shopping center there at the corner of school, and that resulted in the changing of the roads coming into campus. The entrance was changed because of that shopping center. We combined our entrance with the shopping center. So that made a change in the roads in that year. Also, to satisfy some commitments for previous gifts to the school, the bell tower was built on campus. So that was a big thing.
And when was that built?
I would say 77, somewhere in that era, give or take a few years in doing it. If you want the progression of the school, St. Andrews started with 6 dormitories. We then added next Winston-Salem in 1964 when I set foot on campus. They were just completing Kings Mountain, or what is known as Pate Hall. In fact, at the time I set foot on campus, they had only one bathroom open in the dorm. They were finishing it up. So that's how close it was. The library had been completed that year too. I guess it was put up in 63, DeTamble. And then in the fall of 67, the PE building was completed. And then we moved into the science building in January of 1970. And the last major development on campus, I guess, was the building of Burris, which I would say, I'm not sure when, mid to late 80s, Burris Center was opened. So that takes care of the buildings on campus. We had a Presbyterian Counseling Center. It occupied an old house that sat where Flora McDonald Gardens are. They built a new counseling center across the road, which is the Scottish Heritage Center now. And that was probably in the 90s when that took place. So that's the major buildings. In between times, we put a new roof on Belk, which radically changed the appearance. And actually, prior to that new roof, in pursuit of increasing seating space in cafeteria, they removed the cantilever from the bottom of the Belk Center porch by moving it out to the edge. If you look in the very early pictures, the porch is cantilevered all the way around, and the glass goes all the way down to the ground.
I came in, let's see, I graduated in 83, so I came in about, I took a little extra time in graduating. I think it was 78. And Dr. Rowland was sort of the pioneer of the computer age there. One, I think it was a PDP 11 they had, which kind of was a big deal for a small school like that.
Yeah, Roland was definitely the pioneer of the computer age. Helen Gustafson, I think, was the one that got us into it initially. We were using teletypes in some of the classrooms and sending the stuff via teletype to the Triangle University Computation Center. We finally graduated from that to card punches and card readers. And if you were in the early days of selected topics in modern science, one of the laboratory sections was devoted to writing computer programs, and we had key punches sitting in the lab that the students were using. And for the modern age, the key punch, you have a very definite size card that you're punching little holes in. Uh, and you got to get the holes right, and guess what? Syntax kills you all the time. Whoops, I put a comma in the wrong place.
Yep.
I got a B instead of a D. Reading through those programs, trying to find those errors, and heaven help you if you drop your stack of cards, having to put them back together again. It's not too bad for the beginner where the stack of cards may be 15 cards, but if you're had gotten along further in the bit and you now had a stack of 100 cards in your program to sort those cards back in correct order to run through the computer. And at that time, you took your cards into the LA building, and where we still have the computer center. They had the PDV 11 there ultimately, but prior to that, there was a big card reader. You took them in, handed to the operators there. They would run the cards to Triangle University Computation Center. They would run your program there and send you a printout back of your program. And it would take several hours between the time you turned in the program and you got back your printout to take a look, see whether you're successful or nope, got a comma in the wrong place, got to find it and start over again. But Roland in those days, Triangle University Computation Center would go down for maintenance about 2 hours every night, usually along about 5 a.m. in the morning. So it was funny. A lot of people marked the times. You'd see Bill Rowland leaving the LA building when you came in at 7:30 for an 8 o'clock class. And the reason he was leaving was because the computer had gone down for maintenance. He had been there all night working on some computer program and was just now going home.
I remember Roland, his attitude of when things went wrong was of great value to me. It's like, well, I really didn't want to go on that camping trip. I'm going to have to reinstall the entire system on the PDP-11 computer, and we had terminals, and they had that card reader when I was there too. So that I remember as well. The night. What's the history of the night?
I'm not sure.
Yeah,
the night as I know it, when I set foot on campus, there was a big trophy case in the student union. It had some of the athletic trophies, and they had a full night uniform, the chest plate, the chainmail suit, so forth. In those days, you had, the orientation for the freshmen. The serfs was what they referred to as the freshmen. And usually one of the leaders in the student government would dress up in the night uniform or night as a knight, the night, and read off the edicts and so forth for the next 3 weeks that you were supposed to follow and so forth. We built the PE building, and there was a place in the front underneath that cover for a mascot. Rufus Hackney's family commissioned some of the art students and the art faculty member at that time to make a knight. So there was a knight made, welded together and so forth. And that was the knight for, I guess 20 years, maybe a little longer than that. The knight got abused a little bit. Somebody stole his sword, the original sword, and they cobbled up a much inferior imitation of a sword, which was nowhere near as big as it should be, to replace it. And then we had a member of the Belk family give us the statue of the knight, which stands out front of the gym now.
You remember the team was called the Knights when you were there, or did
Yeah,
that evolve
Knights was already
from the
coined as
beginning?
academic, or as the athletic symbol at that point. So I have no idea what the choice of the Knights were, but I would assume with the Scottish heritage and British and so forth, that's where the knight comes from, but I may be wrong about that. The original program was Christianity and Culture, which we were part of in the 60s. That went on all 4 years. For a freshman student walking in, you were looking at 6 credit hours for Christianity and Culture in the fall and spring. You met 3 times a week for 2 hours. When you got to your sophomore year, you had another 6 hours of Christianity and Culture meeting all 6 days of the week. We had classes on Saturday in those early days. So as a sophomore, you had Saturday 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock Christianity and Culture class. It's gone through enough number of revolutions. Martin can look it up and see. I think it's currently referred to as SAGE.
SAGE, that's
in
it.
our
Right.
and it's backed off in the total requirement of ours in the bit. Now, some of it they have essentially moved outside of the SAGE program to require general education electives.
But SAGE was something significant for me because it was really to get a multi experience that you got in education that you might not have gotten if you were just choosing it on your own.
Well, most people wouldn't have chosen it on their own. But you find, well, back in my day, you looked at most of your colleges had some kind of core program, or you had your general collection of electives you had to look at. For me as a student going to college, I looked at the bit and said, well, I think this as an integrated program is going to be much easier than taking philosophy courses, art courses, and so forth individually. So that was my approach to looking at it, and it worked out pretty well, I think, in the long run. And it's something that most of the students that year still remember and make use of some of the things they learned in.
And it's still there. That's an important piece that I appreciated and got a lot out of it. I really enjoyed all the aspects of it. It was a great program. Some people don't realize it originally was called St. Andrew's Presbyterian College, and it had a connection to the Presbyterian Church, and then that disconnected. I think about the time I was there in the
St. Andrews is started by the merger of Presbyterian Junior College and Flora McDonald. If you look back at history, you'll find the church played a major role in supporting colleges in the 50s, and they were supporting a large number of small colleges. And a result of a survey, they decided they wanted to consolidate the colleges together. And that's how St. Andrews came about. But 20 years later, the church began to move away from directly supporting colleges. They moved from rather a financial commitment to the colleges more so to simply a religious tie to the school rather than cash. And even in the early days, I think, the amount of dollars that they put into it was not huge numbers. I think probably by the mid 70s, you'd be looking at the church's contribution to the overall budget was probably less than $200,000.
I see.
But they ultimately completely moved away and just left an affiliation with the church. Now, we got into, well, I guess the late 80s, maybe early 90s. We had one of the admissions directors decide that he thought the school would be an easier sell if it did not have the Presbyterian in it. And I don't know when we officially made the change to
St. Andrew's University.
Well, St. Andrew's University was 2012.
Oh, okay.
It was done when we merged with Weber.
Oh, right.
And one of the bits in that was with the international students and so forth was in the marketing, a university was held as more desirable than a college,
Right,
particularly to
right,
the international student.
right.
And that's, you can see out there the growing trend that,
Yeah,
virtually every college now is a university rather
right.
than a college that they've changed their name. It's a status symbol
Yeah, right. Gotcha.
in doing it. Um, Many years earlier, there was a big argument about the question of a Bachelor of Arts degree or a Bachelor of Science degree.
Uh-huh.
Admissions wanted a Bachelor of Science degree because they felt it was easier to sell.
Uh-huh.
The traditionalists would look at, say, like Davison, and, well, they still give a Bachelor of Arts degree. You might not realize this, but in the early days of St. Andrews, if you want a Bachelor of Science degree, there were only two routes to it. You had to be in secretarial administration.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that was there when the school opened, or you had to be in music, were the only two areas on campus that granted a BS. Everything else in a degree awarded was a BA.
Mm-hmm. Yes, in fact, mine is a Bachelor of Arts in Math Computer Science. It was a contract major through it because that's what was available when Dr. Rowland helped me put it together. Yeah, it's evolved quite a bit from that time period.
Yeah, most of it is involved in what I would guess the early 90s
Mm-hmm.
when the BS showed up.
The last comment is the radio station. People don't realize that we used to have a radio station. I love that WSAP, and it was, and I'm so glad you have a picture of it in there. I was, quote, the engineer of the station, which, that was just meant I was willing to get shocked on the turntable, but they did have it. It went over the cable system. That a cable system, right? It wasn't a full broadcast. It was kind of like through a wall cable system.
Well, WSAP was there when I got on
Yeah.
campus. Dave McLean, I think, was the first faculty member initially behind helping the kids set up. They used a carrier current system.
Yep.
And what we're talking about, cable, is not a cable like you think about in the TV connections these days. This was an underground cable that simply connected the dorms.
Mm-hmm.
You did not have a physical connection between your radio and that cable.
Mm-hmm.
You simply tuned in a certain frequency on the radio dial, and you picked it up. And in the early days, one of the things happened if the transmitter got out of tune, you could pick up the telephone and you could listen to the radio on your telephone. Um, so that was an interesting experience there. When they built the gym, the tin can, the old PE building, Farrago, as some of you may know, became available. And at that point, the radio station moved from Orange up to Farrago and was housed there a number of years. I'm not sure what the motivation behind the change was, but eventually they moved from Farrago to the White House next to Farrago.
Yeah, which is,
and that was originally an infirmary on campus.
Oh, really?
Yes,
I
that
see.
was an infirmary, and the radio station was housed there. And during the period where they were in the house, the cables began to develop some problems that really needed to be replaced, and that was going to be an expensive bit to run all that underground cable. We were also in a period of time where cable TV was becoming popular, and the decision was made to run cable to all the dormitory rooms for cable TV, which was a big deal because if you had set foot on campus in 1964, the only place you had TVs were in the main lounge of the dormitories. In fact, there was a big fundraiser on campus in the mid 60s to get a color TV, which was going to be over in Belk if you wanted to watch color television. That was sort of the move forward, but at this point, students could have TVs anywhere they wanted. It was actually a student who did all the installation of the cable for the cable TV.
Now, when I was there, the station, you could pick it up through the cable connection. Yeah. Okay.
So once they got the cable there and they needed to replace that, the radio station made the decision to go to cable because it was readily available. Now, whether that was the right decision or not, I don't know. One of your bits is once you put the radio station on the cable and the student is on the cable, why do you stop at the radio station? You got access to everything from A to Z.
Right.
Did that hurt them? I don't know. But that was the direction they went. I guess the radio station's demise was when the decision became the physical plant wanted the building that the radio station was in, and supposedly student life was going to give them space and paid for the radio station. But the problem became in timelines that the radio station packed up and moved their stuff out so physical plant could move in, and that space and Pate never materialized and had vanished at that point.
I see.
The equipment was stored in the basement and it just never got back out after that.
Well, when I was there, we had carts, we had advertisers that were pitching in, and one of the students, I forgot his name in my dorm in Mecklenburg, had convinced all the record companies that we were bigger than we were, so we would get all the latest records coming in. So it's pretty popular. A new record came out, we had it, we could play it there.
Yeah.
And that was an exciting time.
Oh, yeah, it was, definitely exciting because of that. And the radio station, one of their big plays, if you find it, I think mentioned in one of the yearbooks, the radio station was only a club on campus that raised money. In fact, they've got, in one of the references somewhere I saw, they were talking about, this year they had made $10,000 on advertising.
Yeah.
They used to put on big promotions and giveaways for the students over in Belk at times, and one year they got carried away with the things of awards and so forth. I don't remember what the prizes was, but they had well, one of them was, if you can bring in a cannon, we're going to give you X number of record albums and so forth. Well, it turns out the VFW post down on Atkins Street has 2 small cannons. So guess what? The students went down to the VFW post to get a cannon, and they started back to campus with it and got down to where Haney's Tire Service is now, the bypass, before the police department stopped and asked them where they were going with the cannon. Those cannons are now secured in concrete blocks that make them a little harder to run off with. But that was one of the memorable rounds of doing it. The radio station also had a DJ, which set a Guinness Book of World Records for the longest broadcast back in the 60s.
Wow.
I don't know how many hours it was, 60 some hours, something like that. It was at least a week he sat there in the Belk broadcasting. I don't know how many minutes he got off each hour, but to run to the bathroom and so forth, but he put it in. And, later we had the debate team set a debate record for Guinness. I think we may have set that once and somebody broke it and we broke it back again.
Cool. Sports at St. Andrews when I was there was soccer. A big thing but they had a number of other sports. And then, of course, they moved into football later on. But another activity that was a big deal growing at my time and is now much bigger is the equestrian program. Talk a little bit about the evolution of it.
Equestrian program has grown over the years. So shortly after we moved in the science building, we had a student by the name of Lynn Simpson who wanted to bring a horse to campus. She had, and Roger Decker decided he was going to help her out, and he found the space on campus for the horse up in the there was an old barn up near the traffic circle and a house there, which what those days development was using it as an office. So they put the horse up in the barn, and Lynn had him there a couple of years, and they later expanded and built some stables over behind, out from Granville and Concord back in the woods. I think remains are still back there. So that they expanded a number of horses there, and then Shelby French got involved in it when she came to campus and essentially shifted the horses out to a farm she owned, Singing Woods, and she was the first equestrian coach and got them into the IHSA. And I think we hosted one of the national IHSA events there on campus in the early days. Needless to say, the IHSA was much smaller at that point, and she got us into the ANRC, which we won a number of championships there in the late 80s, early 90s in doing it. And then we moved out. Well, we got the chance to purchase and build the equestrian center. It started out with the rehab. The therapeutic riding center was built initially, and as more funds became available, we built what the students refer to as the lesson barn, and it went up in stages. That there was a therapeutic riding center and a barn, well, two small barns for it, and then later they added the covered arena, and we put up the lesson barn and then a covered arena for it, and then there was a indoor arena added to the therapeutic side, and then the western barn, which is an extension of the lesson barn for the western team horses and so forth, in growing it. What most people don't really realize is that Equestrian Center is now been out there 25 years, basically since it was built. So it's now beginning to get some age on it. And like everything else on campus, age means maintenance is required for it to keep things together.
Raising money, which is why we have the campaign going on. Excellent. Yeah, beautiful place. I went out to see it, and I didn't know anything about that as a student, and then made the extra trip to see the equestrian center and talk to some of the students, and it's really become another important aspect of St. Andrews.
Oh, there's no question about that. And the equestrian teams have become very successful, particularly the Western teams, in having won 2 national titles, I believe, and placed fairly high on a couple other years at the national level.
The last is the wall. The wall. Was it there? Was it the way it was now? How did the wall evolve?
The wall was not there originally. During the Vietnam era, we had a couple of students, or I don't know how many students, they painted on the big wall leading up from the cafeteria, "Get out of Vietnam," and that stayed there for years. It wasn't removed. When Roger Decker became dean of students, one of his things, he was actually there a couple of years before that, he decided that they were going to have a wall, and the wall was to be the center section between the two steps.
I see. That's it.
And that's how it started out. But what's happened over the years, the students have continually expanded the space. Not only is it the center sections, it's all the walls around the steps, and then they started painting the asphalt between the steps. I think the concept of the wall is a nice idea, but I think sometimes the students get carried away and abusing the privilege by expanding beyond where they should.
Right.
And sometimes some of the comments they put on the wall probably really aren't appropriate for what it's intended to function in doing.
But it is a part of the history.
Oh, there's no question it's part of a history.
And it was also used for notifications. We painted once. We had a Mr. Rogers party at Mecklenburg, and it was used for big announcements. And
it was used quite frequently to announce parties and so forth on campus. And that's one of the changes now that's happened is the school is struggling currently for a party structure, you might say.
Right.
In my day and your day, that social life functioned around the dorms. It was generally the dorms were behind staging the various parties. In fact, you had periods of time where, this dorm always had luau, this dorm
a toga
always
party,
and so forth. And they also fell at a time of season. They would go on year after year. The dorm structure isn't quite as tight in sponsoring that type of thing anymore. So the parties are a little more spread out in when they happened. I think also, I don't know what the current policies are, but I know we had one round where, well, the fire marshal created problems. They decided that there were limits on the number of people you could have in a certain amount of space. If you were in a 3-story dorm, that makes sense because your party center was the main lounge. It's not a very big area. If you were in a flat dorm, the party center is the whole courtyard in the way they do it. And if you look at that courtyard, you've got 3 gates around the perimeter for exits, plus the doors to the main lounge. So it's not a problem of getting a large number of people out of there if you want to deal with it. But for some reason, the bit was you could not have parties in the courtyards of these flat dorms. So that sort of put an end to that.
And why? Another reason for the fundraiser is so they'll have a place for that too, which is the plan of using part of Belt for that.
Yeah, that would. The current plan, I think, centers around putting the cafeteria upstairs and using the ground floor sort of as a party center or recreational area, so that you don't have too much stuff there that would become a problem if you had flooding, or could be easily moved out if you were facing a flooding situation.
Which is excellent. Well, Rooney, we've covered a lot, and I hope people have enjoyed it as much as I did. And I do want to say, make sure to get your copy. It's available, and it is a fundraiser. All the money, and Rooney donated massive amounts of time. Others did. I contributed funds for it. So all the money that goes to this, it pays for the book with Lulu, and the rest goes entirely for the fundraising campaigns to St. Andrews. You can click the link below to learn more about it. And I hope you enjoyed our journey together of a little bit of the history of my favorite St. Andrews University, which is to me a very special place. And if anyone's never been there, I hope you sometime visit and get permission to walk around, get a tour of the campus. It's a wonderful space in Laurinburg, North Carolina. It's great having you here.
And if you want this book for Christmas, you need to order it now.
Right.
You've got several weeks turnaround time on this thing.
That's right.
Best.
Print on demand is longer. You might want to even expedite the shipping. So that's it. Great. Thanks, Rooney. This is terrific. Right.
Did you get any questions from the people?
No, I didn't. They all gave a thumb up, and no one gave me a darn question. I asked.
It's going to be a short show. There were no questions.
There are no questions. So I said, hey, what do you want me to ask? And everyone said, that's a great idea. So
actually, maybe we ought to stick that one in, and somewhere you can edit it.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to ask the questions. Like, whoops, there's no questions.
That's right.
It's over.
That's it.
Well, nope, I don't want to do that. I made up my own questions.